"Ma'am, step away from the counter. People like you don't walk in asking for a $5 million withdrawal." The words crashed across the private banking lobby with the force of a slammed vault door, and every conversation inside the marble-lined branch came to an abrupt stop. At exactly 10:12 on a warm Tuesday morning in downtown Atlanta, dozens of eyes turned toward one woman standing quietly beside the polished walnut counter. Vanessa Carter never raised her voice. She never argued. She simply looked at the bank manager with calm, steady eyes that revealed nothing except patience. She wore dark blue jeans, clean white sneakers, and a light gray sweater, carrying only a slim leather portfolio. There were no designer logos, no jewelry meant to impress, no security detail following behind her. To everyone watching, she looked like an ordinary customer who had wandered into the wrong place. That assumption would become the most expensive mistake anyone in that building had ever made. Daniel Brooks, the branch manager, folded his arms as though he had already reached his verdict. Years of confidence mixed with unchecked assumptions settled across his face. "You heard me," he said, louder this time, making sure every customer in the lobby could hear. "Private banking is reserved for verified clients." Vanessa answered with the same calm expression. "I am a verified client. I'd simply like to complete my withdrawal." Daniel gave a short laugh that drew nervous smiles from two employees standing nearby. Instead of checking her account, he glanced at her clothes again. His decision had already been made before he touched a keyboard. Around the lobby, whispers spread from chair to chair. An elderly couple exchanged uncertain looks. A businessman waiting for an appointment lowered his tablet just enough to watch. Near the coffee station, a young teller named Emily Foster frowned. Something about the woman standing at the counter didn't match Daniel's confident accusations. She had seen difficult customers before. This woman wasn't acting like one. Vanessa stood with remarkable composure, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing even, as though she had walked through moments exactly like this before. Daniel leaned closer across the counter. "You expect me to believe someone dressed like that is moving $5 million today?" Vanessa met his eyes without blinking. "I expect you to verify my account before making assumptions." For a brief second, silence settled over the room. It was the kind of silence that appears just before a summer storm breaks across the horizon. Instead of reaching for the computer, Daniel pushed her identification gently back across the counter without looking at it. "I'm not wasting my staff's time on fake stories." Emily shifted uneasily behind her workstation. She recognized the last name on the identification before it disappeared back toward Vanessa, but she couldn't quite place why it sounded familiar. Before she could speak, another employee quietly whispered, "Daniel's got this." Vanessa slowly picked up her ID and slipped it back into her portfolio. There was no anger in her face, only disappointment that seemed older than this building itself. The lobby felt smaller now, every customer sensing that something had gone terribly wrong even if they couldn't yet explain why. Daniel straightened his tie, convinced he had already won the confrontation. He had no idea that the quiet woman standing across from him hadn't come to argue, hadn't come to prove herself, and certainly hadn't come to ask for permission. She had come to measure the character of the institution she already owned, and the test had only just begun. Vanessa Carter glanced once around the lobby before resting her portfolio gently on the polished counter. Nothing about her expression suggested embarrassment or frustration. If anything, she seemed to be observing every detail with quiet precision, from the greeting customers received when they entered to the hesitation on each employee's face whenever Daniel Brooks spoke. She had spent more than 20 years building businesses by studying people before studying numbers. Balance sheets revealed profits. Human behavior revealed culture. And culture determined whether a company deserved to survive. Few people inside the branch could have guessed that the woman standing in front of them had built Summit Financial Holdings from a single commercial real estate investment into one of the largest financial groups in the United States. Even fewer knew that only 3 months earlier, Summit had completed the acquisition of Heritage National Bank, including every regional branch, every executive office, and every employee working inside this building. Vanessa had intentionally told no one she was coming. No executive announcement had been sent. No district manager had prepared the staff. Her executive assistant, Carla Evans, was the only person who knew where she would be that morning. The visit was never about the money. The withdrawal request was simply the opening step of a carefully designed service audit that measured integrity under pressure. Money could always be transferred electronically. Character could not. Daniel watched her with growing confidence, mistaking her silence for surrender. Behind him, two relationship bankers quietly resumed organizing paperwork, believing the situation would soon end with security escorting an unwanted visitor outside. Only Emily Foster continued watching. She had joined the bank less than a year earlier after graduating from the University of Georgia, and one lesson from training refused to leave her mind. Every customer deserved verification before judgment. That policy was repeated so often that it had become almost automatic. Yet today, no one seemed interested in following it. Emily looked toward the customer profile system on her monitor. She was not assigned to the interaction, but curiosity quietly overcame hesitation. She typed the last name she had briefly noticed on the identification card. Before she could finish entering the information, Daniel's voice cut across the room again. "Emily, stay focused on your own clients." She immediately removed her hands from the keyboard, but not before noticing that the system had already begun displaying several priority alerts beside the unfinished search. Her heartbeat quickened. Something about this customer was very different from what everyone assumed. Vanessa noticed the exchange without reacting. She simply adjusted the sleeve of her sweater and looked toward the large windows overlooking Peachtree Street, where commuters continued walking beneath the bright Georgia sunshine, completely unaware that the future of an entire branch was quietly being decided inside. She remembered something her late father often told her after difficult days when she was growing up. The first person to lose control usually loses the truth. Those words had carried her through hostile negotiations, economic recessions, and countless moments when people underestimated her before learning her name. They guided her now just as steadily as they had decades earlier. Daniel stepped away from the counter and spoke to another manager in a voice just low enough to sound private, but just loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "She is trying to make herself look important." A few customers looked uncertain. Others looked uncomfortable. No one laughed this time. The atmosphere had begun to change. Doubt was no longer surrounding Vanessa. It was slowly surrounding the decisions being made by the people responsible for serving her. Daniel Brooks walked back toward the counter with renewed confidence, convinced the room had already accepted his version of events. Authority, he believed, depended on sounding certain rather than being correct. He rested both hands on the polished surface and looked directly at Vanessa. "I am giving you one final opportunity to leave before this becomes an unnecessary situation." Vanessa answered with the same measured tone that had never once risen above a normal conversation. "The only unnecessary situation is refusing to verify a legitimate customer." Daniel smiled, but it was the kind of smile that appeared only after someone had stopped listening. "You keep calling yourself a customer, but every experienced banker knows when something does not add up." Several people waiting for appointments exchanged uneasy glances. The businessman who had lowered his tablet earlier now set it completely aside. He had watched enough corporate meetings to recognize the difference between confidence and arrogance. Near the reception desk, Emily Foster quietly opened her workstation again. She knew Daniel had told her to stay out of the matter, but the unfinished customer search continued pulling at her attention. Carefully, without attracting notice, she entered the full name she had memorized from the identification card. The system responded almost instantly. A series of priority notifications flashed across her screen before automatically locking sensitive information behind executive authorization. Emily froze. She had never seen that security level before. Even without opening the restricted profile, one message remained visible. Executive client. Corporate level clearance. She looked toward Vanessa again, her heartbeat suddenly louder than the conversations filling the lobby. Before Emily could gather the courage to speak, another voice joined the confrontation. Richard Collins, a wealthy investor who visited the branch almost every week, stepped closer with a slight shake of his head. Dressed in an expensive navy suit and carrying an air of entitlement, he glanced at Vanessa before addressing Daniel instead. "Some people simply enjoy creating scenes." Daniel nodded in agreement. "Exactly my point." Richard continued, speaking loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. "Private banking is built on trust. If someone cannot present themselves professionally, perhaps they should not expect special treatment." Vanessa slowly turned toward him. There was no anger in her expression, only quiet disappointment. Respect should never depend on appearance, sir. Richard shrugged dismissively. That sounds nice, but the real world works differently. Emily felt the words settle over the room like heavy clouds before a thunderstorm. She looked from Richard to Daniel and back to the executive alerts glowing silently on her monitor. Every instinct told her something was deeply wrong. Across the lobby, another employee whispered that security should probably be notified before the situation became more complicated. Daniel immediately agreed. He reached for the desk phone and calmly instructed the security supervisor to come to the private banking floor. His voice carried the certainty of someone convinced that procedure was on his side. Vanessa never attempted to stop him. She simply watched, almost as though each decision was becoming another page in a report that had already begun writing itself. The atmosphere shifted again as customers noticed her remarkable composure. Most people wrongly accused would argue, plead, or leave. Vanessa did none of those things. She stood exactly where she had been since entering the branch, patient and steady, allowing every assumption to reveal itself without interruption. Emily finally stood from her chair. She knew speaking against a branch manager could threaten the career she had only recently begun, but remaining silent suddenly felt like participating in the very failure the bank claimed it would never tolerate. Emily Foster took one careful step away from her workstation before stopping beside the customer service desk. Every instinct told her to remain quiet, but the flashing executive clearance notice she had seen moments earlier refused to leave her mind. She looked at Daniel Brooks with respectful hesitation. Sir, I think we should verify her account before we make any more decisions. Daniel turned slowly, his expression tightening the moment he realized one of his own employees was questioning him in front of customers. Emily, I gave you an instruction. Return to your station. She swallowed and nodded, but her voice remained steady. Our training says every client deserves verification before judgment. It will only take a minute. Daniel's answer came without hesitation. The matter has already been decided. The words settled over the lobby with uncomfortable finality. Vanessa watched the exchange quietly. She appreciated Emily's professionalism, but she made no effort to rescue the young banker from the difficult position she had entered. Leadership often revealed itself when ordinary people chose principle over convenience. Near the waiting area, an older woman named Margaret Ellis slowly stood from her chair. She had banked at the branch for nearly 20 years and had never interrupted an employee before. Young man, she said calmly, looking directly at Daniel. If someone asked you to verify an account, why would you refuse to do something so simple? Daniel forced a polite smile. Ma'am, we are protecting the bank from potential fraud. Margaret tilted her head slightly. Protecting the bank starts with following your own procedures. A quiet murmur spread across the lobby. Several customers nodded in agreement. Richard Collins folded his arms, clearly irritated that the room was no longer supporting Daniel as confidently as before. People are forgetting that managers have experience, he said. Sometimes instinct matters. Vanessa finally spoke again, her voice composed and unmistakably clear. Instinct is valuable. Assumptions are expensive. The sentence lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Even Richard looked away without answering. At that moment, the elevator doors opened near the private offices, and security supervisor Michael Turner walked into the lobby with measured steps. He was a former Marine who believed every situation deserved facts before action. Daniel immediately motioned him over. Michael, this customer refuses to leave after being advised that we cannot process her request. Michael looked first at Daniel, then at Vanessa. What surprised him was not the disagreement, but the atmosphere surrounding it. The woman standing at the counter appeared remarkably calm, while nearly everyone else seemed increasingly uneasy. Ma'am, Michael said respectfully, may I ask what happened? Before Vanessa could answer, Daniel spoke over her. There is nothing complicated here. Michael gently raised one hand. I would like to hear from both sides. Vanessa met his eyes. I requested a withdrawal. I presented my identification. My account has not been verified, and no one has attempted to review my information. Michael frowned slightly. That sequence did not match the normal process. He turned toward Daniel. Did we verify the account? Daniel answered immediately. It was unnecessary. Emily closed her eyes for a brief moment. Those two words erased the last remaining confidence she had in her manager's judgment. Around the lobby, customers exchanged increasingly concerned looks. They had arrived expecting routine banking appointments. Instead, they were watching a simple verification become a test of fairness. Vanessa quietly glanced at the large clock above the reception desk. Only 16 minutes had passed since she entered the branch. It felt much longer. Somewhere across the city, Carla Evans would already know exactly how long the audit had been running. Vanessa reached into her portfolio, removed her phone, unlocked the screen, and rested her thumb above a familiar contact. She did not press the call button yet. She simply waited, giving everyone in the room one final opportunity to choose professionalism before consequences replaced possibilities. Vanessa rested her phone beside the leather portfolio without unlocking it again. She was not delaying because she lacked options. She was delaying because every leader deserved one last opportunity to do the right thing before facing the consequences of doing the wrong thing. Michael Turner remained standing between her and Daniel Brooks, uncertain which direction the situation was about to take. "Sir," Michael said carefully, "if verifying the account only takes a few moments, perhaps we should complete the process." Daniel's patience finally began to crack. "I have already made my decision." His voice echoed through the quiet lobby with enough force to stop every whispered conversation. Vanessa looked toward the large windows where sunlight reflected across the glass towers outside. The scene reminded her of another morning more than 20 years earlier, when she was 24 years old and carrying a folder filled with business plans into a neighborhood bank only a few miles from where she now stood. She remembered wearing her best navy blazer because she believed looking professional would make people listen. Instead, she spent nearly an hour trying to convince a loan officer that her proposal deserved to be read before being dismissed. The meeting ended without anyone seriously reviewing her application. She had walked out feeling invisible, but she also walked out determined that no institution she ever built would measure a person before measuring the facts. That memory had never left her. It became the foundation for every hiring policy, every leadership program, and every customer service standard she later approved. The lobby slowly returned to the present as Vanessa took a quiet breath. "I have seen moments like this before," she said softly, not to Daniel alone, but to everyone listening. "They rarely begin with numbers. They begin with assumptions." No one answered. Even Richard Collins looked increasingly uncomfortable. Emily Foster lowered her eyes for a moment, realizing the woman standing before them spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had survived far greater challenges than an unpleasant morning at a bank. Michael turned once more toward Daniel. "Please authorize the verification." Daniel shook his head without hesitation. "No, this conversation is finished." Margaret Ellis sighed quietly from the waiting area. "Young man, every minute you refuse to verify her account makes this situation harder to explain." Daniel ignored her completely. Instead, he looked back at Vanessa. "You have been asked several times to leave. If you continue refusing, you will force us to take additional steps." Vanessa's expression never changed. "I have refused nothing except unfair treatment." Those words settled over the room with remarkable weight. Customers who had entered expecting routine appointments were no longer watching a disagreement over a banking transaction. They were witnessing a test of character unfolding in real time. Emily could no longer remain silent. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite the nervousness she felt, "our system identified her as a priority client before the profile locked. I believe we are making a serious mistake." Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "You searched the account after I instructed you not to?" Emily answered honestly. "I followed the verification process we were trained to follow." For the first time that morning, Daniel had no immediate response. The room became so quiet that the soft ticking of the clock above the reception desk seemed unusually loud. Vanessa slowly picked up her phone once more. This time she unlocked the screen, selected a single contact, and placed her finger lightly over the call button. She looked around the lobby one final time, giving every person present a last chance to choose integrity before the truth entered the room with a voice none of them would be able to ignore. Vanessa pressed the call button and lifted the phone to her ear. The line connected before the second ring. "Good morning, Miss Carter." Carla Evans answered with the calm efficiency that had defined every year she had served as Vanessa's executive assistant. Vanessa never looked away from Daniel Brooks as she spoke. Carla, begin Executive Protocol 7. There was no hesitation on the other end. Confirmed. Executive Protocol 7 is now active. Corporate compliance has been notified. Internal audit has been initiated. Legal counsel has been placed on standby. The executive operations team is joining the review. Vanessa simply replied, "Thank you," before lowering the phone slightly. Daniel gave a dismissive smile. "Calling a lawyer is not going to change anything." Vanessa answered quietly, "I did not call a lawyer." Carla's voice continued through the speaker with measured precision. "Your location has been verified through the executive security system. The branch has been placed under active operational review. All customer service interactions from the last 30 minutes are being preserved for compliance analysis." Emily's eyes widened. Those were not words used during ordinary customer complaints. Michael Turner looked from Vanessa to Daniel, sensing that the situation had moved into unfamiliar territory. Richard Collins shifted uneasily where he stood, suddenly wishing he had remained in the waiting area instead of inserting himself into the dispute. Carla spoke again. "Would you like me to notify the regional president now?" Vanessa paused for only a moment. "Not yet. Everyone still has an opportunity to make the correct decision." Daniel laughed softly, attempting to restore the confidence that had slowly disappeared from the room. "You expect us to believe that one phone call changes anything?" Vanessa looked at him with remarkable calm. "No. Decisions change things. Phone calls simply document them." The words settled over the lobby with unmistakable weight. Emily glanced once more at the executive alerts still waiting silently on her monitor. She realized that every passing minute was creating a record that could never be rewritten. Michael folded his hands in front of him. "Sir," he said to Daniel, "I strongly recommend we complete the account verification immediately." Daniel refused to move toward the computer. Pride had become heavier than procedure. "We are finished discussing this." Carla interrupted once more. "Ms. Carter, executive records confirm that no verification attempt has been made on your account since your arrival 17 minutes ago. Compliance has flagged the branch for procedural deviation." Several customers exchanged surprised looks. Margaret Ellis quietly shook her head. 17 minutes, she whispered. All of this could have been avoided in less than 60 seconds. Vanessa nodded almost imperceptibly. That is usually how trust is lost. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city continued moving without interruption, but inside the branch time seemed suspended. Every employee understood that the conversation had become larger than a withdrawal request. It had become a measure of leadership itself. Daniel crossed his arms once again, refusing to acknowledge the growing concern around him. Emily noticed that even the employees who had supported him earlier were no longer speaking. Silence had replaced certainty. Vanessa returned the phone to her portfolio, but did not close it. She knew the next few minutes would determine far more than one manager's future. Somewhere inside the corporate headquarters, systems were already moving exactly as they had been designed. Reports were opening. Audit logs were compiling. Executive notifications were traveling from one office to another. Yet inside the branch, no alarms sounded and no announcements were made. The quiet remained almost unsettling. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice steady enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "I have always believed that character reveals itself before authority does. Today, this branch has revealed both." The branch doors opened again, but no customers entered. Instead, two senior executives from the regional office walked inside with purposeful, unhurried steps, followed closely by the Director of Corporate Compliance. Their arrival silenced the lobby more effectively than any raised voice ever could. Daniel Brooks straightened his jacket, forcing a confident smile that faded the moment the compliance director looked past him and walked directly toward Vanessa Carter. Without hesitation, she extended her hand. "Good morning, Ms. Carter. We apologize for the experience you have had this morning." The room seemed to stop breathing. Daniel stared without speaking. Emily felt her heart racing as every unanswered question suddenly found its answer. Richard Collins slowly lowered his eyes, realizing the assumptions he had defended only moments earlier had collapsed completely. Vanessa accepted the greeting with quiet professionalism. "Thank you for coming so quickly." The compliance director nodded. Executive Protocol 7 requires immediate review whenever the chief executive officer reports a possible breakdown in customer standards. Daniel's face lost every trace of certainty. Chief Executive Officer? He repeated almost under his breath, as though the words themselves refused to make sense. Vanessa finally turned toward him. Her expression remained calm, neither triumphant nor angry. Yes, Daniel. She allowed a brief silence to settle over the room before continuing. The woman you refuse to verify is the Chief Executive Officer of Summit Financial Holdings, the organization that owns this bank. No one moved. Even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed louder than the silence filling the lobby. Daniel looked from Vanessa to the regional executives, searching desperately for someone to deny what he had just heard. No one did. Emily watched her manager's confidence disappear in a matter of seconds. The authority he had relied upon all morning suddenly seemed very small compared to the quiet dignity standing across from him. Michael Turner removed his hands from his belt and stood respectfully at attention. Margaret Ellis closed her eyes briefly, then whispered, "I knew something was wrong the moment no one would verify her account." Richard took a slow step backward, remembering every word he had spoken about appearances and first impressions. Vanessa looked around the lobby, making eye contact with employees and customers alike. "The greatest mistake made here today was not failing to recognize me," she said evenly. "It was deciding how someone deserved to be treated before learning who they were." The regional president nodded in agreement. "Our records confirm that Ms. Carter's account qualified for immediate executive service from the moment she entered the branch. No verification attempt was ever completed." Daniel finally found his voice. "I did not know who she was." Vanessa answered gently but firmly. "That is exactly the point. Respect cannot depend on titles, positions, or account balances. If kindness begins only after someone important is identified, then it is not professionalism. It is convenience." Every employee lowered their eyes. Emily stood silently, relieved that she had chosen to speak when she did. The compliance director opened a tablet and reviewed the audit timeline. "Every interaction has been preserved," she said. "Corporate will complete a full evaluation of today's events." Vanessa nodded once before looking back at Daniel. "You believe this morning was about a withdrawal request." "It never was. It was about whether this branch would treat an ordinary customer with fairness when no one believed she had influence. That question has now been answered." The compliance director finished reviewing the audit timeline before looking toward the regional president with a quiet nod. No dramatic announcement followed. No raised voices echoed through the marble lobby. The consequences arrived with the same professionalism that should have guided every decision from the beginning. The regional president turned to Daniel Brooks. "Effective immediately, you are being relieved of managerial responsibilities pending the outcome of the corporate investigation. Your system credentials have been suspended." Daniel instinctively reached for the identification badge hanging from his jacket. At that exact moment, the small indicator light on the card reader beside the executive office changed from green to red. One simple light said everything words no longer could. Around the lobby, employees stared in complete silence. The authority that had seemed unquestionable less than half an hour earlier had disappeared without a single argument. The compliance director continued reading from her tablet. "Additional interviews will be conducted with every employee present. Customer statements will be collected. All security recordings, internal communications, and transaction logs have been preserved." Michael Turner quietly stepped aside, no longer standing between Vanessa and anyone else. Instead, he stood beside the customers, understanding that his responsibility had never been to protect titles, but to protect fairness. Emily Foster remained near her workstation, uncertain whether she should feel relieved or overwhelmed. Vanessa noticed her immediately. "Emily." The young banker looked up. "Yes, Miss Carter." Vanessa offered a small, genuine smile. "Thank you for choosing procedure over pressure. Integrity often begins with one person willing to ask a simple question." Emily felt her eyes begin to fill with emotion, but she maintained her composure. "I only followed the training." Vanessa nodded. "Then you reminded everyone else what the training was meant to accomplish." Margaret Ellis smiled warmly from the waiting area. "Young lady, never lose that courage." Even Richard Collins stepped forward, his confidence replaced by quiet humility. "Ms. Carter," he said carefully, "I owe you an apology. I judged you before I knew anything about you." Vanessa met his eyes with the same calm expression she had carried throughout the morning. "I appreciate your honesty. The important lesson is not that I was the chief executive officer. The important lesson is that every person deserves respect before anyone knows their title. Richard lowered his head in acknowledgement. Several customers quietly agreed, realizing they had witnessed something much larger than an executive review. They had watched assumptions collapse under the weight of simple facts. The regional president turned toward the remaining employees. Beginning today, every branch in this region will complete renewed customer service training focused on fairness, professionalism, and unbiased verification procedures. We are not introducing a new standard. We are returning to the one that already existed. Heads nodded across the lobby. No one argued. The lesson had become impossible to ignore. Vanessa finally picked up her portfolio once more. She had never come looking for embarrassment, revenge, or recognition. She had come looking for truth. Before walking away, she paused beside the customer service counter where everything had begun less than 30 minutes earlier. She looked across the polished marble floors, the quiet waiting area, the employees standing thoughtfully behind their desks, and the customers who had witnessed every moment unfold. The branch looked exactly the same as it had when she first entered, yet everything inside it had changed. Policies had not changed. Computers had not changed. The building had not changed. Only people's understanding of what real leadership required had changed, and that lesson would remain long after the lobby returned to its ordinary routine. Vanessa Carter walked slowly toward the entrance, but before reaching the glass doors, she turned back one final time. Every conversation had stopped. Every employee stood quietly behind the counters where routine transactions had taken place only minutes before. The marble lobby felt different now, not because the building had changed, but because the people inside had. Vanessa looked across the room with calm eyes that carried neither anger nor satisfaction. "I did not come here hoping someone would fail," she said. "I came here hoping your values would succeed." No one interrupted her. The silence itself had become a form of respect. The regional president stepped beside her. "Ms. Carter, we will begin implementing the new training immediately." Vanessa nodded. "Do not create new promises. Keep the ones that already exist. Every policy in this institution already says people deserve fairness. The challenge has never been writing better policies. The challenge has always been living by them." Emily Foster listened carefully, knowing those words would remain with her for the rest of her career. Michael Turner quietly thanked her for speaking up earlier. Margaret Ellis smiled as she gathered her purse, believing she had witnessed something she would tell her grandchildren about for years. Even Richard Collins remained standing near the waiting area, reflecting on how quickly confidence built on assumptions could disappear when confronted by truth. Vanessa turned toward Emily once more. "One person cannot change an entire culture in a single morning," she said. "But one honest decision can remind everyone what that culture is supposed to be." Emily nodded with quiet determination. "I will remember that." Vanessa smiled warmly. "Good. Someday another customer will walk through these doors wearing ordinary clothes, carrying ordinary dreams, hoping to be treated with ordinary respect. When that day comes, make sure they never have to earn the dignity they already deserve." The regional president looked across the branch before addressing every employee present. "Beginning today, our performance will not be measured only by financial results. It will also be measured by the trust people feel the moment they walk through our doors." Heads nodded throughout the lobby. The lesson no longer belonged to one branch or one difficult morning. It had become part of the institution itself. Vanessa finally reached the entrance as sunlight poured through the glass, filling the lobby with a quiet warmth that had been missing when she first arrived. She paused for one final thought before stepping outside. The strongest leaders do not ask whether an important person has entered the room. They ask whether every person has been treated with importance. With that, she walked into the busy streets of downtown Atlanta exactly as she had entered, without an entourage, without celebration, and without asking anyone to recognize her name. Behind her, the branch slowly returned to its daily routine, but every greeting sounded more sincere, every conversation more thoughtful, and every customer was welcomed before being judged. The audit would eventually be completed, reports would be filed, and decisions would become official, but the most meaningful change had already happened long before the paperwork was finished. It happened the moment people realized that respect should never depend on appearance, influence, or position. It should begin the instant another human being stands before you. And that was the standard Vanessa Carter had quietly restored without ever needing to raise her voice. Because true leadership is never measured by how loudly it speaks. It is measured by how deeply it changes the people who are listening.